Welcome to another episode of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is my friend and colleague, Jesse Lyn Stoner. Grace Under Pressure, those of you who have been watching know it's a show that poses questions to thought leaders and doers like Jesse, who are helping us come to a better understanding of ourselves. And Grace Under Pressure reveals what's too often considered the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment, the compassion. Grace for me is generosity we show, respect we give, and the compassion we demonstrate. When you do this as a leader, especially now during challenging times, it requires the ability to act for others. So welcome, Jesse. I'm so happy to have you on today's show.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, John.
Great. And I want to tell folks about you. First of all, as Dr. Jesse Lyn Stoner, founder of Seaport Center for Collaborative Leadership. And don't we need collaboration now? She's a foremost expert on how to create shared vision and strategies. For more than 25 years, although you look at her and you go, 25 years, no. She's worked closely with leaders and hundreds of organizations using collaborative processes. I love that word collaboration because we're going to talk about that, to engage everyone in the workforce. Believe it or not, or I should say believe it or not, she got her street cred she was a business executive. She's a great speaker too. Well, at least she used to be before the virtual world, but she speaks virtually, so seek her out. She's the author of several books, including the bestseller, Full Steam Ahead, Unleash the Power of Vision, which she co-authored with Ken Blanchard, and it's been translated into 22 languages, and at last count, 500,000 copies, I think.
Close, yeah.
Yeah. So she's worked for big name companies, Marriott, Skanska, Stanley Black & Decker, SAP, and she's a director of the publishing house, Barrett Kohler. She's also a prolific writer, and she's active on Twitter and LinkedIn, and when I say active, getting her views about her articles out there. So welcome, Jesse. Good. So today, I always ask our guests, we're going through tough times. So what are you hearing from the executives with whom you're working?
Some of them, probably most of them, are really just in a reactive mode, trying to figure out how to survive and how to adapt. And I'm hearing a lot of phrases like pivot to digital, and trying to figure out, given the circumstances, how do we do what it is that we do and how do we make it work? A few.
When you say reactive, because some of the folks I've talked to, and it just depends, I suppose, on the companies you're working to, are seizing this as an opportunity. But I guess you're seeing it as kind of, I'm not sure yet, and so I'm just sort of letting it come to me. Are you seeing that?
No, yeah, a few. I'm seeing that some, not a lot, are doing that exactly, saying, oh, we wanted to move in this direction anyway, and this is pushing us faster where we want to go. Or they're saying, let's take a breath. Let's rethink what business we're really in, how we're going about it, and how are we going to move forward into the future in a way that's actually going to get us where we want to go in a stronger position.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because, in our American business model, we reward the first movers, and then, are you a fast follower or first mover? But I like the perspective, not all of us are ready to just jump into the deep end. And as you said, some are holding back. So,
well, it's interesting because I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and one of the companies that I've worked with recently is Kepler's bookstore, and it's a community-based bookstore. It's very well known because it was established in the 1950s, and it's a place where famous people came and read poetry and things like that at that time. And they have reinvented themselves over the last 8 years as a strong community bookstore. And the vision is that the professionals, the people that work there, will be treated like professionals, compensated like professionals, not just paid hourly wages, and they have made great strides in this, in truly serving the entire community, not just being an entity that's profit driven, although they certainly have to be profit driven to be in business. But they obviously had to close down with the shutdown. But then as things started opening back up, they've been very cautious about reopening for two reasons. One is they're concerned about the health of the employees and the people that are coming in.
Excuse me.
No problem. And the second concern is make sure you're okay.
Oh, I'm fine. Excuse me.
That's right. I'm not going to keep talking while you're choking to death.
All choked up about this. Excuse me. Sorry.
No problem. And the second thing is that they're looking at this as a great time to take a step back and say, how positioned are we for moving into the future? And these are our priorities in terms of making a difference in the world, creating more literacy, supporting our community, and paying a professional wage to the people that work here. And so they're doing a lot. They're having a lot of conversations, and they're using technology to do this because they can't do this in person. Now, it's a smaller organization. I think maybe there might be less than 30 people, so they can pull this off using Zoom. But they're involving, they have a board of directors is involved in these conversations. And for me, I've been facilitating. It's been very gratifying to see the kind of thinking, the really sincere thinking that's going into this, and not just saying, oh my God, everything's on fire, it's all burning down, what are we going to do, how are we going to survive? And so there are people that are doing it right.
That's I'm wonderful. I cotton on to the term you're saying is thinking. So, and I think, our businesses are run by very bright people, but so often we are pushed by the immediacy of the moment that we don't value thinking or reflection. Do you see that?
Yes, absolutely. And the problem is then what the thinking is around is short term, and it's around how can I get back to doing what I was doing before, or how can I make it work? So I'm going to have all the same employees, and I'm going to keep them doing the same thing, but we just got to do it harder. We got to do it faster. We've got to make it work. And they're trying to stuff things into something that it actually won't fit in. And I was actually really impressed. I read an article about what Airbnb had done, and this was early in the pandemic. And a lot of large companies were furloughing people, or even laying them off. And but they did it strategically. They did it with in mind. They said, okay, where do we think people are going to be traveling to? Because they had been looking at business travelers. There's not going to be a lot of business travelers, but we think people are going to want to travel locally, and we should refocus on our core business, which was the original, let's open up our homes to people that are coming into our community. And so they organized around, they didn't redo their vision of what they're about, but they looked at their strategies and said, right now, our strategy, let's let go of this strategy to get more business travelers, and let's refocus our strategies. And so they redeployed people in other, so they did have to furlough some people, but they did it thoughtfully, they did it strategically, and they did it intentionally, and they communicated well. I mean, it's hard to have to tell people that they don't have a job anymore. It's hard to be somebody who doesn't have a job anymore. So I'm not saying this is good news, but the way they did it was respectful and intentional and not haphazard. And I give them a lot of credit for that.
No, that's a good concept, intentional and respectful. I mean, those are core concept of grace, which I look at the impetus for the greater good. So it's a good link. So essentially, to survive in crisis, we need resilience. So do you ever talk to your clients about resilience? Do you teach them?
It's not a word that I use heads on, but I'm totally familiar with it. And my friend Eileen McDarr has written a number of books on this. It's her topic, and I'd love to talk to her about it. And what she says, that resilience is not about bouncing back. Because the definition of the dictionary is to reform your shape. And she says that resilience is about bouncing forward. It's about growing as you grow through something. So resilience is the ability to take something in and reform yourself in order to respond to the current situation.
Yeah, that's a great concept.
Yeah.
It just links to what you just said about Airbnb and to a degree Kepler of reinventing themselves. It's not going to be exact. We know our new normal, whatever it is, we're creating it now. We're not going back to the way it was, regardless.
Yes, exactly. And the thing is, the core doesn't have to change who you are. I think it's important to know who you are, what business you're in, but how you implement it. So your strategies may need to change based on what's happening, or your goals may need to change. So, but you don't have to totally start from scratch. I think you go back to, like Airbnb did, and said, what business are we in? We're in the business of supporting people who live in homes to open their homes up, to invite others in, to interact with them, to the extent that you want, to welcome to your home, and to in this economy to share and make some money also.
Sure.
And that's their core business, and so they didn't have to change who they are. But they did have to make some real fundamental shifts in how they're going about it.
Well, they're an example then of what you had just described as resilience as reforming, because they're essentially adapting to the changing times. So.
Right. And as I think about it for individuals also, it's like you know who you are, but you may look a little different on the outside, and your behaviors may be a little different. And so resilience is actually one of the most important skills that we can have, because this is a constantly changing world, and it's just speeding up faster and faster.
Right. And that, and that is leads to the great ambiguity, the great unknown, which makes all of us uncomfortable, and I saw a survey yesterday that was the number one issue facing organizations, or what they were looking for in executives for the future was dealing with ambiguity. So, and which gets to the point of so often when we think of challenging times, and our economy is, Wall Street's doing well, but I don't know that translates to Main Street. But the feeling is that we need to how we do things, which gets back to our purpose. And I know you have written a lot about purpose. So.
Right. And I mean, when you said the disconnect between what's happening with the stock market and the economy is, I'm just scratching my head trying to understand. I think some large companies, depending on what business they're in, are doing okay. But there's so many small to mid-sized companies that, really need to take a look at this very issue that you're talking about, revisit their purpose. Why do I exist? What is my reason for existence? And then what will it look like when I'm fulfilling it? And as you say, John, that grace is the how, and I support that.
Well, thank you. And the point I was trying to make before I forgot what I was going to say, it was about, as we look at crisis provokes opportunity. And I think one of that, and are you seeing this for opportunity to recognize new talent in the organization or uncover talent? Are you seeing that? So people rising to the fore. So.
I think that absolutely that's what's going to happen. I think that especially right now in this virtual environment where so many people are in a virtual environment, there's people are feeling disconnected. So I've noticed. This one woman told me, and she was on a team, not a team leader. She said, I've been calling people and checking in with them to see how they're doing because I don't see them in the hallway anymore. And just touching base. And I think so it's not just about resilience. I think those people that can figure out how to create human contact from a distance are also the ones that are going to survive better in this environment.
Without question. I mean, ambiguity is this big issue. The other issue is isolation. Where the casual conversation in the hallway is no more. And so executives, leaders I work with have to make it doubly difficult to reach out and connect, as you were just talking about, and do it willfully. So.
Yeah, I think so. I think that they've got to really be thinking about how do I lead a virtual team, and it's not just about getting the work done and how can we be effective, efficient in our meetings and our decision making, but how they really need to be thinking about how do I create a sense of team cohesion. How do I have a sense of team identity? How do I help people stay connected with each other? And how do I show them that I care? And create processes for them to be able to show each other that.
Any suggestions you have for being connected more in our virtual world? What you're seeing?
Well, I think one thing is to hold team meetings with everybody. But I think one of the team meetings could be a conversation about what can we do, because I think it's specific to the individuals, and the more they get involved in that, the more they'll come up with really good ideas on how to stay connected. So the conversation is not just about the work, but it's about how are we going to do the work in a way that supports us. I think the other thing that they can do is send a check-in survey, and I really encourage that. Just quick 10 questions. How are you doing? It could be on a 1 to 10 scale kind of thing, and then let everybody know the results of the survey, because one of the problems with surveys is when it's a one-way thing, people feel like they're shouting into the void. So just quickly, let everybody on the team know, here's what I was hearing. And we can't do anything about some of these things because that's the way they are. But maybe there's some of the things we can do some things about. Here's some ideas. Do you have ideas? And get some conversations going around these things.
What I'm seeing with executives is them reaching out and asking their employees at every level, what changes do you want to see? What would you like? What can we do? And just to your point, you can't do everything, but at least at minimum, you can ask, and second, listen. So
Right.
That's so important. And that's essential to team. So would you say, I'm just going to throw a question here and makes it different, because you are an expert in teaming. Are there central precepts to teaming that it's the same as physical or virtual, or do you see any commonality between them? There got to be some things holding us together. Maybe one of them being purpose. So.
Yeah, there's still the same principles of what makes a high performance team. It's that when it's virtual, it has to be more intentional. It's some of the things that are going to happen naturally are not going to happen. But the characteristics of a high performance team, and you can look and say, well, to what extent is this happening, is that people are aligned around a shared vision. They share the same values, and in terms of how they're going to implement it, they may have different values for their lives, but they're not in conflict with those of the team. And the values of the team, if it's an accounting team, it would be, being accurate and efficient. If it's a marketing team, it might be being creative and innovative. So they have the shared values. There's a sense on a high-performing team of personal empowerment, that once people are aligned around the same vision and share the same values, they can go out and take action on this without needing to have a whole lot of controls in place, because the vision itself is the control. All that can happen virtually. But there needs to be a means for communication, because a definition of a team is that a shared purpose and the opportunity to coordinate your efforts with each other. So you've got to rethink your communication processes a little bit in order. And then in terms of, just pride and accomplishment, those things are going to happen naturally.
Right. It's expected that that our new normal will include a kind of, the word I use and others too, is the hybrid workplace, where some people are in an office and others are
Yeah.
working virtually. Do you have a comment on that?
I think it's true. I think so many people have now discovered that they can do things that they never thought that they could do virtually. And they made assumptions about, well, we could never, have people working at home. We can't have flexible work hours because there's a control mentality and we need everybody there. We need to watch them, make sure they're doing their work. And what we're finding is that instead of measuring process, we're measuring output. And as long as people are getting the work done, it doesn't matter where they are. And a lot of high-tech places have already figured this out. You don't need a bunch of coders, programmers sitting in a room. They can go do it anywhere. And so they've constructed new organizations with a large remote workforce anyway. And I think other kinds of businesses are now discovering that much of it can be done remotely. And I think that's great. I think...
I wholly agree with you, and you and I are small business people, and in a way, we've always had part of our lives are virtual because we're connecting with our clients, if at minimum if we can't do it face to face, the good old fashioned telephone, or we would do it Zoom to a degree, not to the degree it is now, but it does so. But at the same time, we're human beings and we crave others. I mean, we crave being with other people. So,
right. And one of the things that's interesting, because one of the organizations I'm working with is in the process now of trying to figure out, they're giving up their large office space and they're trying to rethink, how are we going to do our business now where we want to have some of it remote and some of it on site. And so they're talking to the employees about what do they want. And the thing is, some of the employees want to be in the office and some of them don't. But it's not necessarily driven by the work, it's driven by their temperaments. Extroverts want to interact with other people and they miss people, and heavy duty introverts are like, leave me alone, let me go to my work, I couldn't be happier. And then there's everybody in the middle. So I think one of the dangers is, as we look at reconfiguring our organizations, is not doing it on the basis of personal preference, but doing it on the basis of what's logical in terms of business processes and what's needed.
No, that's very powerful, and I think that I think this is going to have a beyond the effect of the COVID-19. We're rethinking work and the nature of work, and those are good questions to ask. And one of those big questions is inclusion. So, what does it mean if some people are at the office and some people are remotely? How do we treat people equitably? So.
Yeah, and the other thing about inclusion that, as you mentioned, that is, I think about diversity and inclusion. When we have a remote workforce, we can choose. We have a much wider pool to choose from. We don't have to have people moving to our community, and there's an opportunity to actually create a more diverse workforce in a way that's really going to be very powerful and helpful for the organization.
That's a powerful thought, Jesse. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. And it opens up whole new opportunities. Now, we are human beings still, although it may seem more robotic at times, or bots, shall we say. But part of us is when it gets to inclusion, and the topic of promotion. Proximity to power has always been a plus. So, what happens if I'm in the office and you're working from home? Who's going to get noticed? So,
yeah, that's a challenge, and very few true meritocracies exist. Do you have some thoughts on this, John? Because
I do actually. I first posited this question because I thought this is going to be a great topic for people like you of 30 years ago when you were doing your PhD. It's a great topic to study.
Yeah.
But the challenge is, Jesse, leaders have to address it right now, and put ideas and standards and processes together. And so how do we ensure voices are heard? And you had talked about the introverts. So as a boss, how do I make sure that I'm listening? And because if I say, how are we doing? And I have no problem expressing myself, but somebody else might think, I'm just not into that, and I don't want to talk to a video screen. So, and then we get signals that, oh, everything's fine, And so I liked your idea, what you were talking about, the check-in and the what was it, the pulse survey, or what?
Yeah, I think so. And then, I mean, just in terms of finding out where people are at, and then I want to get back to your point, because I hadn't thought about it, and I think it's really important, that's what I meant about being more intentional and structured, is if you do a check-in, have everybody say a sentence or something. And then the other thing is, never assume that silence means consent. So you've got to really, you have to exaggerate in a certain way how you're reading the body signals and how you're getting information from the people on the team. People have to actually say it as opposed to assume that you're reading them. But honestly, even in a room in person, we've assumed silence means consent, and we think we made a decision, and then we walk out in the hall and you hear the truth of what really went on in the meeting. But I think, to your point about how do we know who to promote, and if you want to get promoted, how do you become visible? I think it's a very important opportunity right now to get out of this kind of old networking mentality that we've had, this kind of roles, and really rethink, how do we get the right people in the right jobs? And I think that there's an opportunity in this.
Right. And getting back to the talent question, I believe it's a time for leaders to be, or executives to be, looking for the bright folks in their team, and particularly some who may have been passed over before, or, and give them opportunities. But, we look for critical thinkers, and getting back to our points, pay special attention to the introverts, because they're the ones that are always observing, and what's on your mind. And I have to find a way to, maybe it's like you said, that, in a conference room or where we're physically there, introverts aren't going to voice, may not be as comfortable voicing our ideas. So then it's up to the executive to have one-on-ones, and create it that way. So,
and two things: to have one-on-ones, and to create an environment, a team environment, where the team takes responsibility for making sure that everybody speaks up, and it's not just on the team leaders. And in a high-performance team, you walk in the room, you don't even know who the team leader is, and people will be asking each other their opinions, and because they know to reach out.
That's such a good idea, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because the dynamic that I've defaulted to in most of my interviews are the sort of the leader follower model, and it is so. Organizations don't necessarily work that way, structurally maybe, but it's collegial and it's team oriented, because most of our businesses are teams.
They're more powerful when the leader steps back and doesn't have everybody dependent on them. And leaders are happier, actually. I mean, they think they're supposed to do all the leading, and that maybe they're not doing their job right if they're not in the middle of the fray. But the price of that is, the price is, at an individual level for the person, it's not healthy for them. It's not healthy for the team. Teams that have fluidity and shared leadership perform at a much higher level.
Great. We're coming to the end of the show. And so I always like to ask our guests if they have a comment on grace, what they've seen in their life, or a personal example. Or is there something you'd like to share, Jesse? So,
that's a great question. I think grace comes all the time. Every time I recognize that I'm not in control, and I let go. And then it happens. I mean, it's kind of amazing. But I mean, I'll tell you a very quick story of a few weeks ago. I was driving alone in through a mountainous area, and I was 40 minutes from the nearest town, and there was no cell service on a windy road where cars are going 65 miles an hour, and there's no shoulder, and I got a flat tire, and I kind of went over to the edge, but I'm over the edge of the road, but it's a sheer cliff straight down. And I'm thinking, I've never changed a tire in my life, and I can't call AAA. What am I going to do? And I thought, well, I guess I just have to figure out how to change it, because cars are just zipping by, and they're going by so fast they couldn't have stopped anyway. And I got everything out of the trunk, and I couldn't get the jack unscrewed. And I thought, I'm in trouble now. And I just stood there looking at it, and a pickup truck coming from the other direction, pulls over and yells at me and said, "Do you need any help?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And this man made a U-turn, pulled behind me, and 10 minutes later, he had changed my tire. And I stood there looking at him, and I said, did you go the other direction? You passed me and you turned around and came back?" And he said, "Yeah, I did." And I said, "I just don't know how to thank you." And he said, "Well, pay it forward." And he said, if somebody in my family had been in your situation, I would hope they would have done the same thing for them. And I thought, that's grace, isn't it?
Oh, that is grace indeed. As you were telling the story, I was getting nervous as you were describing it.
Well, and it was even worse than that, because the sun was starting to dip behind the mountains. I was in big trouble.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. And that is a powerful story of grace. Jesse, how can people find you?
At my website, cpointcenter.com, or my name, jessestoner.com, will take you to the blog page. And that's the best way to find me.
Good. Jesse, thanks so much for being a part of today's show and sharing your examples. And every time I talk to you, every time I read your stuff, I come away smarter. So thank you.
It's mutual, John. Thank you very much.